pertains to that bylaw is included within it, so you're not necessarily referring to other parts of your bylaw. So just something to keep in mind. Like if you want it to be part of the 40R district, it has to be part of this bylaw. But there are definitions. I'm sorry.
Yeah. As an overlay, it would still have to reference the underlying zoning, right?
So as an overlay district, it doesn't really have to reference the underlying zoning. There is a clause in the bylaw that says that it's an overlay district, and so the underlying zoning also applies. But the idea is that a developer would have to choose between one or the other. Couldn't do a mix and match approach. So if they want to do the 40R bylaw, they have to abide entirely by this bylaw, like exclusively by this bylaw, really.
I like that. I mean, that makes sense. If I'm a developer, I don't want to chase back and forth. It's all in this. Okay.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I can make this a little bigger. So there are a lot of definitions, and as I was looking through this, I was thinking I can pull up what I've done so far, but I was thinking that there are some definitions to add, like cottage court, townhouse, some others that came up in our public engagement sessions that we might want to include.
I don't think anyone liked the cottage court.
It was actually split. In the second public engagement, everybody disliked the cottage court, but in the first public engagement session, there were at least a few people who were very interested. So something. Okay. I mean, if you were at that table, so if you heard that the cottage court is a no-go, that's fine. We don't need to include it.
Oh, I was trying to promote it, but I think most people impulsively didn't like the graphics and were turned off to it. And I said, well, it doesn't have to be shaped right like that. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. This is all kind of, this is the section that refers to the underlying zoning, just stating that it is a district superimposed on top of underlying zoning districts. That's fairly standard. And then you get into permitted uses. So you specify here, which types of residential uses you think should be included. Parking, accessory uses, things like that. But basically, this is the area where you would specify, the types of uses that you want to see across all of the, or the one district or the potentially multiple districts. And if you have sub-districts, if you want to include different standards for different districts, if you want to have multiple districts and then include different standards, you go down to section B, and it specifies that further. So
this would be once. So if we wanted to do two different geographic areas, that's where we would split, because what we were talking about was possibly they would have different characteristics. Mm-hmm. That one would be more compatible with the community center, historical overlay, more infill of smaller scale, and the other one would be like from the malls east, and that could be the larger. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So this is where you split. Okay.
There's a component here where it asks, let's see, it says, for mixed use developments, you're supposed to specify the permitted non-residential uses that you want to see. So, this is specifically for mixed use developments. So if you have like apartments on top and commercial on the bottom, it asks that you list out which types of residential uses you want to see, and then which types of non-residential uses you want to see or are allowed, I guess. So it's really looking for like a list of fairly specific non-residential uses, like restaurants and things like that you want to see or don't. Well, just the things you want to see. So you want to think about what you don't want to see as well. Right. But I guess as we're looking through this, one thing I think it's might be helpful to think about is are there parts of this that you're, as you read it, where you're like, I don't know that we have a clear answer on this yet. And if that's the case, would it be useful to have like a focus group or some additional community engagement? Because the scope, I was talking to Kyle about this today, the scope for this project does allow for some additional community engagement, and that could be in any, it's not a requirement, but it's just, there is room for that if it feels like that would be, useful to get other perspectives.
A question just came to mind, Aiden.
Yeah.
Items or uses that we do not want. If the underlying district limits uses, does that automatically apply to this, or do we have to re-speak that?
So you do. I mean, so basically the idea is that the underlying district and this overlay district don't really speak to each other, actually, because this bylaw has to be self-contained. If there are uses that you want to see in this bylaw or in this district, in the overlay district, you have to specify those uses. Okay. So even if restaurants are allowed in the business district, you still have to say restaurants are allowed in the overlay district.
What if it's not allowed, though?
So if you don't allow surveyors in the underlying district, you gotta say, I don't want surveyors in the other district.
Right. The easy way to do it is just to only specify, and it's really only asking to specify the uses that you do want to allow. And then it's sort of understood that everything you don't list is not allowed. But
Which
yeah.
is how town works anyway. Okay.
Yeah.
Are there examples that other towns have used that we can sort of look at?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Oh, didn't mean to do that. I was trying to pull up. I think that Kyle and I, we created a while back a list of all of the towns that have 40R districts on the books. I mean, off the top of my head, you have like East Hampton, South Hadley, there are others, Northampton. Yeah, there are a number, and they all have to have a 40R district. They have to have a bylaw, just like this, that uses this template. So, yeah, they're there, and they're really good reference points. So, yeah, we can definitely, look at those for guidance. Mm-hmm. Okay. There is also a note here. This is not if you do 40R. This is obviously all if we do want to go with 40R. But a mixed use development project must have at least 51% of the total gross floor area dedicated to residential uses. So you can't have in a mixed use building, like an 80% of the floor area dedicated to, whatever, restaurant or some other commercial use, and then like 1 or 2 apartments on top. It has to be primarily a residential use. So something to consider, because that's the way that the state has written this, because they want to make sure that there's a focus on housing. But that said, you can allow non-residential uses, and there's a sort of that falls under this other uses category. So you have to specify all the business, commercial, and other uses that you want to see in this bylaw. Again, you got to remember that like this is going to be overlaid on top of a business district that allows for all the business uses that are allowed in Hadley. But they won't, if they're developing to that standard, the business district underlying zoning standard, they won't have the same design requirements or, site layout requirements as they would if they're developing using this overlay district. But food for thought. Then we jump into the housing and affordability section. And there are a couple of things to think about here. Most of this is kind of like standard stuff that is kind of a requirement for 40R. But there is an allowance for exempting projects with 12 or fewer units from the affordability requirements. And that's something that the town can choose to do or not do. But it's sort of the state put it in there as a way to basically make it a little easier for small developers to not have to follow the affordability requirements. So that's a decision that will need to be made as well.
Yeah, I think that's something we'll have to discuss. I think
Yeah.
my first inclination is to strike that because we have already in our bylaws that if it's 6 or more, you have to have an affordable. And so we are seeing a lot of 5s,
That's what happens.
to avoid that.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Yeah, no, that is definitely what happens. Okay. That's good. Made a note of that.
But that's just my opinions. That's why I said we'll have to knock that around the table.
A lot of this affordability stuff, as I mentioned, it is kind of just standard stuff. But there are comments that explain it, which I'll leave for you all to read through if you'd like. And then submission requirements is all, again, fairly basic.
Section about bedrooms, Aidan.
Oh,
Number of
yeah.
bedrooms.
I can go back up.
What is that?
Yeah, let's skip through that. Number of housing units with 3 or more bedrooms, except as provided for below and consistent with the interagency agreement regarding housing opportunities for families with children, or any successor agreement for all projects containing at least 13 residential units and not otherwise subject to an eligible state or federal housing subsidy program under EOHLC's subsidized housing inventory guidelines. Not less than 10% of housing units constructed shall contain 3 or more bedrooms. So that's the important part right there.
Less than.
Not less than.
At least 10%.
Yeah.
Have to have 3 or more.
3 or more bedrooms.
If there are 13 units.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So basically to make sure that there's a diversity and it's not all single bedroom units.
Or 2-bedroom.
Or 2-bedroom, right. Sorry if I'm skipping through any of this too quickly. You can feel free to stop me, but getting down to the design and construction, I'm going down here because this is where there's a lot more to think about. I think that there's a lot more room for flexibility. Although actually, no, this is still in the affordability section. Yeah, age restrictions, basically just saying that they're not allowed, or they are allowed, but they don't count. Basically, they don't count toward the number of affordable units. And then we get into this is the section that I think has caused the most, like in previous work with other towns. This has been the hardest section of the bylaw, because it asks for a lot of detail about design standards, dimensional requirements, really pretty specific sort of stuff. And some towns have really done, they've created like very, very substantial like design documents. Does Hadley have something along those lines? Are you aware?
Design documents?
Yeah. Like specifying design standards.
Only in the village overlay district.
Right.
Okay. So like for example, what I'm thinking about is like, and this would be maybe a big lift, but South Hadley has, in Northampton too, I think, but South Hadley anyway they have a separate design standards document that goes is part of the 40R bylaw, and it says to refer to the design document. And if you open up that design document, there are like pretty extensive standards about like facades, definitely like building heights and setbacks and step backs and all this stuff. So you can really go to town with all the design standards, as you could with any, at any point in your bylaw. But
and 40R is okay with that.
yeah, they are. I think that there's probably a line regarding like you can't basically do something that is going to somehow prevent like affordable housing from being built, I guess, through some sort of like, back end way of doing that. But in general, no, I think they'd support having design standards. Yeah. Yep.
But it sounds like that part, the design part, is sort of the secondary part. Like first we have to get an idea of what we want for the bylaw limits, and then talk about the design. Or
well, that's a good way to approach it. I think at the end of the day, the design standards have to be part of the bylaw.
yeah.
So it is all part, but I think that, maybe it would make the most sense internally to tackle some other questions first, if that feels like it makes the most sense. It probably does. Especially, I think the first question, to turn away from reading through the bylaw itself to go to some of my questions that maybe we can think about, is first I can bring this over. Can you all see this other document?
You might only. General?
Do you see this one? Yes, you see this?
Now I see 2 pages.
Great, that's it.
Yeah.
These are the questions that I have. So the first one was to confirm the 2 districts. Does that seem like a good idea based on the public engagement that was done, and I believe the survey results as well? They kind of had, it seems like a lot of residents are the focus seems to be on having potentially 2 different districts or sub-districts, one being the town center and the other being the Hampshire Mall area, and having different density standards, where the Hampshire Mall area is a bit denser, has more room for apartments, and the village, the town center, or quote unquote village scale area, is a little bit reduced density. Does that seem like what you are all hearing? Does that seem like the approach? Or
I think so.
I'm going to try and speak last as the chair, so
I
hear
did not hear,
and
so
Ronnie.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's basically what I've heard. What do you mean by town center? Do we mean like Railroad Street, or are we?
But we have to decide where it's gonna be.
right.
But I think that the big question is, do we have 2 districts? One where it's really dense and the other where we limit how big of a project you can put. And I personally think that's a good idea. So from whatever point east, we have the so-called Hampshire Mall district. And from that point west is the village center district, or whatever he's calling it, town center district.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, that's clearly what I heard expressed. And I do think that they would be 2 different animals. I don't think anyone wants to destroy what, we'd rather build the fabric instead of destroy the fabric of the western part, from the bike tunnel west. That is mostly residential scale, whether it's business or not. I think even, there are dentist office, and there are lawyer offices and
Surveying office.
even the bottom of the barrel. and they all have a residential look to them. And the mall area has much looser design standards, and I think that would lend itself to something. I'm just trying to imagine, like, everyone's seen the thing across from Kindergarten, the
Mhm.
University Drive South.
Mhm.
Things like that would be better suited over there. Cause that's what, three, that might even be 4 stories.
Maybe 5,
I don't think it's, well,
at least 4.
it's probably 4, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think 4 is
Yeah.
probably the max that we,
Well, right now we're at 3,
right.
so.
And sorry, Mark, were you saying 4 stories the max for the higher density area?
I don't know, I
Okay.
think that's something we have to look at and see what the height, and maybe do a little drive around and imagine what 5 stories would look like. And make sure that, like Spanknavel says, yeah, 5 stories I can handle.
Yeah, well, we can't. Cause I think we're concerned with the 3 stories, so
Yes.
that's gonna be a factor of what the fire department can handle.
Yeah.
How high a ladder truck can reach. So
Okay.
we'll have to talk to them before we make that decision.
Okay, that's really, really helpful. So we got to talk to the fire department. Okay. Mhm.
Sure, are you on still? No,
He's
no, he dropped off, that's right.
Yeah.
I think we allowed 4 stories in the new district over by the bridge. I don't think it went 5.
It's definitely, I don't think it went 4, Mark. I think it's only
It could
3.
be 3, yeah. So,
Cause I know that the fire chief is very concerned about tall buildings,
Mhm.
so.
yeah,
Anyway,
Okay, well, that's good to think about. Do you think that it would be useful to hear? So, in addition to the fire department, is there anybody else you think it'd be useful to hear from? Either like specific people in town or groups of people, like, I don't know, business owners or something along those lines, regarding maybe the 2 districts and questions about like what types of uses you'd want to allow. Just throwing out questions here. But does it seem like it'd be useful to have like try and schedule a focus group with, developers or people who own businesses in Hadley?
I don't know how the developers or businesses would help us create a framework. I mean, because it's, our interest is for the town and not necessarily them.
I think, if we just expand upon what we've got, Aiden, as far as allowed uses goes, I think we'll be okay, because to your point earlier, the business district allows X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
And if we're going to limit that to something lesser and somebody really wants to put something that's in the business district, then they're not gonna go the 40R route, they're going to go the business route. So unless there's something that we really find offensive in the current bylaw, I think we could probably run with what we have.
I could imagine having a meeting which invites the full planning board, the fire chief and the police chief, and talk about limits, what's manageable in terms of heights, whatever, and then that would guide us. And then if we wanted to take that framework and run it past a business developer, just to see if, as we've said at some point, we don't want to go through all this effort and have something that that a developer is not gonna approach. You know, that says it's impractical.
Yep.
But I wouldn't start with them. You know, I'd say that would be an optional. You know, we could invite them to a later meeting after we make, you know, public, here's the, you know,
Here's the start of this.
right.
Okay.
Unless anyone thinks otherwise.
Well, I think that personally, dealing with developers for a long time, they're gonna take advantage of whatever is there.
Right.
And you talk to 10 different developers, you're gonna get 10 different answers as to what they wanna see. Obviously, they're gonna wanna see something that they can build that's not gonna break their bank and will give them a return on their investment. So I think if we have this loose enough in terms of what's allowed, not only in what various businesses we're gonna allow, but just the design standards. Cause we don't want cookie cutter going down Route 9, everything's exactly the same.
Mhm.
Again, I envision it being something pretty special if we can do it right.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think there's also an argument to say that if we're gonna engage developers, we could do that in 5 years and say, all right, no one's built. How can we broaden this a bit,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. I think this is gonna be different than the over 55.
Yeah.
Because the over 55 district, in my opinion, was put in a bad place. Who wants to live on Route 9? I mean, granted, this is what we're proposing to do now,
Mhm.
but when the over 55 community, who wants to live right on busy Route 9? So anyhow,
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
see how it goes. Obviously, we can't predict, but I think this is gonna I think it'll be better received, but I also don't think it's going to be there's gonna be 100 applications the day after the bylaw comes into effect.
Yeah.
Right.
No.
Right.
And to your point, I think the Bab Farm development has the potential to be the more desirable because you can get a shuttle or something, or even walk right down to Route 9, but you're just enough removed. I don't know what that is, maybe half a mile or less. That might offer what you're talking about.
What did you call it?
The Bab Farm,
Oh,
which is Rocky Hill
Mhm.
and
North Maple.
Bab is the owner.
yeah.
Is this something you sent us, Aiden?
These questions, I did not send these questions. I can send them along.
Okay. Like
If
that.
that'd be helpful. Sure, I can send that after this meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
And the other thing, Aiden, about what kind of businesses we want to allow,
Yeah.
I think the market's gonna drive that. We certainly aren't gonna reverse engineer that and tell people that you're gonna do this, this, and this, because the retail world is changing every day. And, the cafes and the restaurants are probably going to be the big things where people can actually make that work because you can't buy that online. So anyhow,
Mhm.
we'll see how it plays out.
Sure. I do think that the only reason why this is a question is because you do need to specify which types of businesses are
Mhm.
allowed in the district.
Yeah.
So yeah. So so I hear what you're saying to not make it so constrained. I think is what I'm hearing. But yeah, we do need to put some specific uses down.
Yeah, I could see taking a list of what other communities have put in that
Sure.
category, and then maybe putting that into a spreadsheet and say pluses, minuses, oh, this one requires, semi tractor trailer, this one requires, I don't know, whatever.
Mhm.
And there might be certain things that those bring along that we don't want.
So Mark, sorry, are you saying looking at other communities 40R bylaws for that, and looking at the uses that they allow? Yeah, okay.
To look at what the other communities have put as allowable uses, and then we can go through and say, yeah, that's okay. Nope, not that one. Yep. Nope, not cannabis, not, surveyors, not,
It's a good idea.
Good thing I'm getting ready to go out of business. Or you drive me out.
Okay, so to back up a little bit, on the question on the town center versus Hampshire Mall stories question, this was kind of undecided at this point because the idea is to, for one thing, talk to the fire department, right, about what's feasible.
Yeah.
And then also kind of do well, I don't know, was there another, let's see, is there another step there that was mentioned? I know you mentioned just sort of doing a drive around to try to see what 4 or 5 stories might look like, but it seemed like the main thing was talking to the fire department about the idea of 4, maybe 5 is too much, but some people were saying 5 in the public engagement. That was the kind of to some extent the consensus was the 4 to 5 stories. So I just want to make sure I'm getting.
Yeah, well, fire department's important. Driving around to look at other buildings that are 5 stories high, there's several of them in Amherst, but the problem with those are that they're right on the road. So you can't get a real perspective as to how it might look at the Hampshire Mall because you're right up to it and it
Right.
looks very intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
And if we did, let's say we did do 5 stories, we would have a height limit as well, because there's a range of what your floor to floor height will be.
Mhm.
It's not like the old Victorian houses where it was 12-foot floor to floor. So
Okay.
and speaking of the mall, that just reminds me, a colleague of mine from the diversity committee, Joanne Gotting, sent me or an email the other day, yesterday, about an article in the New York Times, and I went and looked it up, and I took a bunch of screenshots and forwarded on to the planning board and some select beings. But I will send that on to Ronnie.
That mall in New York.
Yeah, it was a story about Lanesboro.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Pittsfield.
Yep. And it talked about it in general across the country
Mhm.
and what the problems are and such, but it seemed very germane. And I'll even send that to you, Aiden.
Great. Yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
interesting. Cool. Okay. Next set of questions I had were relate to parking requirements and things like that. I don't know if we want to get into that right now, or if we want to take a step back and think about, what are the most important next steps, and maybe some logistical questions.
Yeah, I personally think that might be getting into the minutia when we have bigger things to narrow down.
Yeah.
Where, how big, what style.
Right. Okay.
And we are just talking on the planning board about looking into a more nuanced parking requirement. I've brought it up once or twice, and it was mentioned again last night. It's not an easy thing, but that, there are benefits to having parking requirements that acknowledge different uses, because different uses have different traffic intensity. So, for example, being you know, a Dick's Sporting Goods versus a warehouse, you know, those are two extremes. So, but we have a one size fits all that's been around for generations, and it might be time to look at it, but you can also tie your own noose. You know, it can be,
Mhm, right?
it's not easy.
No, it's not.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So these are some initial things to be thinking through. I think, yeah, the main ones really are we want to, I think it'd be probably the most grounding things to do would be to feel really certain about, you know, having the idea of having two districts, kind of specifying what the boundaries of those districts would be. We can think through a process for doing that. You know, we can. One thing that I included in the summary was just a big image of the table that had the big map where people circled the district boundaries that they'd like to see. So I think in reviewing that, it's a lot to work with at least, and I think it's probably a good time for all of you to kind of, you know, review that and think about, you know, if we were to draw out, at least as a draft, what the boundaries should be, you know, what would that look like? That might help in thinking through this as well. And yeah, and I think one note that, you know, I have going forward is to compile a list of other communities 40R bylaws. And I can share some of those out to you just to make it easier to review them, but also to look through the uses that they allow and create that list for all of you to run through.
Mark, were you saying that if it does not list it as acceptable, then it is not acceptable?
I think that's what we were talking about. That's the way our current zoning works, that we say what is permitted, and if it's not explicitly on that list, then it's not. But some towns do it, these are what we don't allow, and then it's really kind of wide open, and we tend to be a little more cautious and say, instead of having a black list, we have a white list, you know, this is what we do allow.
And then if somebody comes in that's not on that list, they can appeal it, or?
Probably,
Well, the only way they could do it is have to go to the zoning board and get a
Yeah.
variance.
yeah.
Okay.
And that is not typically the way to do it. There's criteria for a variance and they would not meet it.
Okay.
Right.
So they shouldn't get a variance. They
Right.
shouldn't be allowed a variance.
It-
They can apply, but they should not get it.
It shouldn't be a hardship.
Right? It's not a hardship. And the hardship is based on the land, not on, well, I needed to do this so I can make more money. That's not a hardship in the eyes of the law and a variance.
And I think, just for reference, the way that has worked is people think, oh, I'll go to the ZBA and I'll get it approved there.
I gotta leave, guys.
Okay, thanks
See you
for
later.
and that maybe at times has been seen as a loophole around our zoning. So, members of the planning board have made it a point to say, if you are gonna go to the ZBA, we will come and testify against you, that we do not think, you know, because if no one shows up and they come to the ZBA, it's like, oh, all right,
Right.
I don't see any opposition.
But I
yeah.
guess I was thinking of as things change and there are new businesses or technologies that, you know, we can't imagine now, but.
Right, and
That's in the
right,
future.
no, exactly, and that might be a case where someone comes and we say, well, that's not on the list, but yeah, we would like to do that. It's gonna take us 6 months to get that into the next town meeting, but we would support you
Okay.
at the ZBA, you know? That's maybe how that might,
Okay.
I don't think that's happened, but that's how it could happen.
Yeah, and that's fairly typical in my experience as well. Okay, so I think that this is something to kind of work with. What does it make sense to all of you to start? I know that we discussed starting to draft the bylaw language. And I did get started on doing that, but I didn't share it with you all because I figured it might be premature before this meeting since, want to make sure that you're all comfortable with the template before providing you the template plus some draft language. But does it seem like the best approach to have Kyle and I, now that Kyle's back, create draft language to then share with you and get your feedback on? Or would you like it to be more of a process where we do kind of what we're doing right now, where we think through these questions at a high level before getting into the specificity of drafting the bylaw?
I don't know what you guys feel, but I would rather have something that I can strike out and edit than start with a blank slate.
Yeah.
Because we're citizen planners. We're not coming here from our planning day jobs.
Mhm.
So, yeah, if you wanted to
Mhm.
start that and then we can say, nope, strike, or edit. And I would think that would be a constructive.
Okay.
Beneficial approach.
Okay.
Yeah, because I have to read since I was out of it, I have to read those bylaws and go through them anyway. So it'll be good to do both of those.
Okay, that sounds good. That's a good note. So I guess that leads to a question around, and this is something that I know Kyle was wondering about and asked me to bring up. Does this still make sense as the frequency of meeting? Does this feel like it's appropriate as we kind of work through the bylaw, or does it make more sense to meet less frequently? Probably wouldn't make sense to meet more frequently, but just so that there's more sort of substantial, this is like a whole section of the bylaw that's been drafted, and then we can walk through it all. Does that seem like a good approach? Just wondering your thoughts.
I feel like we're going into summer vacation mode.
Yeah.
And so I think every 3 to 4 weeks would be,
Once a month, maybe.
yeah. And something we can plan around people's vacation so we can have a quorum, because
Maybe like second Wednesday.
something like that.
Second Wednesday.
Let's see what July looks like.
That's the 9th.
Or first Wednesdays. I don't
Let
know.
me just see. Yeah, I couldn't do the 9th. Yeah, I could do the 3rd Wednesday. In July, I'll be on the road on the 9th. But I could do the 16th. I don't know how that works for other people.
I could do that.
Later than 16th.
Okay.
So that would be in about a month. Okay. Or that would be a
Okay.
month.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And then if you wanted to go back to the 2nd or 3rd in August, maybe August 13th, does that look like a problem for anyone?
Yeah, it works for me.
Okay.
August 13th.
Yeah.
Hi.
I guess I could do it. I have an HOA meeting, but I don't have to be there.
Well, there's, what would the next week be? The 20th?
I could do that.
I can do the 20th.
Here, 20th.
Okay, so we're looking at 7/16 and 8/20.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe September 10th. That's 1, 2, 3 weeks later. Or the 17th. I mean, we're not shooting for the fall special town meeting. I think we're shooting for the spring annual town meeting. But so that, that gives us time to develop this, run it past other parties.
Okay. But I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm hearing that you're not feeling like there's like pressing need for focus groups from other, groups of folks in town.
Not right now until
No.
we have like a tangible thing to
Show them,
present.
right,
Right.
Okay.
I think, either Randy or I can simply ask the fire department,
Okay.
what's your maximum height that you're able to firefight,
Okay, that's really good to know. All right, so now that okay, sorry, I didn't think I missed the last date that you listed. You said July 16th, August 20th, and then September.
September,
say?
we might just not schedule that yet and see how we feel in August. Does that make sense? September feels a world away right now.
yes.
Okay. Okay, that should be fine.
Who knows if you even have a democracy then?
Yeah. All right. So that's great. So with that in mind, that gives some good deadlines. So yeah, as I said, now that Kyle's back, it's going to be a joint effort between the two of us. I do have like the first few pages of a bylaw drafted. I'll share that with Kyle and get his read and his edits, and then we'll try and share that out to you, as soon as possible. And it definitely, a week at least in advance of the July 16th meeting, ideally sooner, for you to review. And in the meantime, reviewing the summary document that I put together, the template, if you feel so inclined. I think it is useful. And just thinking through, I'll send along also, as Ronnie, as you asked, I'll send along those questions that I prepared. So hopefully that can prompt some thinking as well. And everything else that I mentioned as well, like, other 40R bylaws from surrounding communities to take a look at. They're pretty long, and the language is, kind of, it's like it's legal language, so it's not a super fun read. But it is what it is. So yeah, does that feel good? Is there anything else that we think we should talk about?
No, I think it'll give us some nice summer beach reading.
Right, that's a spirit.
Put on your sunscreens, you don't get burnt when you fall asleep.
Yeah, I know. Just as much fun to write as it is to read. Okay, all right. I saw on the agenda that there's approval of a few past meeting minutes.
Yeah, I was gonna see if anyone minded if we put that to the next meeting, because I just printed mine, but I haven't really gone through them, so I kind of wanted to do them justice.
Okay,
Time and effort was put into them.
Another exciting read.
Yeah, but necessary. Yeah, it's interesting. I've been an architect for whatever 40 years, and I take very particular minutes because it's a different function. It's with a client, and you want to track every detail, and this is where you decided that. But in municipal government, you really just want to hit the higher level, and so it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's really just decisions which were made
Right.
and issues which were discussed without any great need for detail. So anything else? Anyone else? No? Okay. Anything else from PVPC?
No, I think that's it. I think the only thing left is really to think about like how much of the bylaw to provide to all of you, or to write in advance of the next meeting. But that might be something that Kyle and I just kind of figure, this is what feels like the right amount to have a discussion about. So I think we'll probably tackle, the relatively easier stuff like the purpose and thinking through the districts and things like that. Basically what we got through, because then we'll leave the design and parking and all of those things for probably after the next meeting. But yeah, if that sounds good to you, then no, I think all set. Got our marching orders.
If you have a chance to send it to us as a Word document, that would be helpful, because I have eye issues, so I might enlarge the font size, and that shouldn't blow up your formatting.
Okay.
But if it's a PDF, I can only get the text so big, so.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Mark, sorry if I think I forgot probably to send it to the email that you use more regularly. So I apologize for that. That was my mistake.
Okay,
I will remember to send it to the right email address.
well, if you send it to both, that's fine.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, if I see it on the one, then it triggers me to. Because I don't get that much I didn't get that much on my planning board. But then when I signed up for something from the state, now I get bombed with master list.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay.
Right. If there's nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Move a second.
Second.
All right. All in favor? Ronnie,
Yeah.
aye. Mark, aye.
Andrew, I.
Andrew, aye. All right, we are adjourned.